Uh-oh.
Thank you, Robert, for that beautiful introduction.
Yeah, Robert has no audio, I guess, so we're introducing Game Center Live, the NYU Game Center's streaming
Oh
show,
wait,
which,
no, there I have audio now. Sorry.
okay, go
Welcome back,
right ahead,
Robert.
Ben. That's great.
Oh Jesus Christ! I've just been doing this show for like a year, and I'm still just fucking it up. Okay, hello, welcome to Game Center Live. This is our weekly streaming show from NYU Game Center, which is a academic program dedicated to the study of games and game design here in New York City. And today we have our weekly running segment, The Discourse, unpacking industry news and telling you exactly the fashionable thing to think. So joining us today is full-time faculty Naomi Clark and Frank Lantz. Take it away.
Everybody,
Right.
hi, Naomi. Thanks, Robert. Hey, chat.
Yeah, all right, let's just jump right into it. So there was big discourse making the news this week. The Atlantic yesterday published this article, essay, I guess is what these are called, by Ian Bogost, who is a regular essayist for The Atlantic. This one in the family section, apparently, about Animal Crossing. So we finally reached the point where Ian Bogost delivers a take on Animal Crossing, much as he did a few months ago for the Untitled Goose Game. You might remember that from an earlier edition of the Discourse. And in this article, both Frank and I take some blame for it.
Look, we don't just report on the news at the Discourse, we make the news.
Apparently, yeah. So
that's not a problem, right?
Yeah. Why not? I think it's inevitable, right? There's no such thing as objective, completely freestanding journalism.
Right. There's just an infinite cycle of people commenting on each other and pretending that it represents some global state about the world.
Exactly. Yeah, so some of you may have been around when I spouted off talking about Japanese village debt in past centuries, and so Ian Bogost decided to quote me. I guess sort of as a foil for his reading, right? Because my reading was kind of trying to look back at, well, what does this mean in Japan, where Animal Crossing comes from? Bogost kind of referred to this on Twitter as an originalist reading, kind of like an originalist reading of the Constitution, I guess. We're trying to like divine the author's intent, which is not something I actually care about at all.
Yeah, it sucks to be pigeonholed, doesn't it? It's a little, kind of an uncomfortable feeling, isn't it, Naomi?
Well, no, actually, I think I'm taking it. I'm taking it right on the chin. I feel like I deserve a little bit of this, and I'm actually thinking about originalism because I'm frequently guilty of this, right? Like I'm really interested in the context that stuff is created in. And I think that makes me perilously close to somebody who's like trying to divine like what the author's intention is. But I personally don't care about what the author's intention is. I care about what's going on unconsciously in the ether around it, right?
Right.
So maybe that's another kind of originalism.
Ian's,
I don't know.
What is Ian's take on Animal Crossing? Because this is a subtle article. He's not coming in with a big, bold, hot take about that it's necessarily good or bad, but he's got a subtler point here. What do you think he's getting at?
So I think his point is that Animal Crossing is not just straightforwardly a capitalism simulation, which I think was sort of his previous take on it from a decade ago, right? He is somewhat well known for this section of one of his books, and he also has given many talks about it where he discusses how his son learned about mortgages from playing Animal Crossing together. And so now he's kind of saying Animal Crossing has this capitalism simulation in it, but it also sort of cuts free of the moorings in a significant way. Because what he's pointing out is that it doesn't matter what you do in Animal Crossing. You can just hang around all day. You can catch bugs and then release the bugs. You can sit on a tree stump all day playing the ocarina if you want. And all of these trappings, like the fact that you can earn all this money, the fact that you could pay back the debt, is a little bit like, it's just another activity you can do. It's not more or less than anything else. It just sort of appears that way because maybe we're trained to to think about capitalist hoops and stuff as things we have to jump through. But as people often point out, Tom Nook does not actually enforce the debt in any kind of way, right? And maybe this sort of ties into my reading.
I think that Ian, who is sort of like the most prominent public intellectual to come out of the world of games, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, who else is in contention? Like Jane McGonigal?
Jane McGonigal is up there. Our colleague Eric Zimmerman, I think, is up there. But I think Ian, because he's writing for The Atlantic, and he really does represent one of, if not the most prominent person. And I think he's been on a really interesting journey over the past few years. And I think in terms of his thinking about games. And I would say that it's sort of a journey towards a more nuanced and appreciation of the complexities of the issue. Whereas I think his original work was very much just about trying to explain to people what was happening in games, that there was such a thing as procedural representation.
Right?
That just that it existed was a kind of novel idea, that there was a rhetoric, there was a way of understanding the systematic aspect of a game as a form of expression, as a form of rhetoric, as an argument. And so trying to make that point, I think, necessarily involved some simplification of what was going on. And now I think he's in a place where he no longer feels like he has to just explain that there's this thing called Animal Crossing, which is like a piece of pop culture that has real estate in it, like actual real estate. It has the dynamics of mortgages and loans, and now that he feels like he has sort of explained that, and we have gotten to the point where we all kind of understand that, now he's able to appreciate the complexity and the subtlety and the nuance of that it doesn't have a clear, obvious meaning, that instead the meaning is ambiguous and strange. If you look at Monopoly, for example, right? Monopoly, the first thing you have to explain to people is that Monopoly has its origins as an exploration of property ownership and taxes and different ways of doing that. And then once people wrap their heads around that, then there's this more complicated thing of like, is Monopoly a reinscription of the logic of ownership and property and capitalism? Is it a critique of that logic?
Or both?
Or is it something else? Is it a joke about it? Or is it an appreciation of it? Or is it a parody of it? Or is it this thing that's neither of those, and none of them individually? And I think that's where we are with this Animal Crossing thing too. He's allowing it to be this multi-layered, complicated thing. But that doesn't sell magazines.
Right. Yeah. So what is the hot take that's selling things here? I guess it's kind of in the headline, right? That Animal Crossing is actually very political. Like, what is the political point? If I were to guess, I think what he's driving at is that Animal Crossing is comforting and a panacea in some ways right now, because it offers a vision of a world beyond work, where we don't have to constantly be striving, like that. We can choose to do that voluntarily of our own free will, but we're not put through the ringer constantly, right?
Yeah, and I think that in a way, I think what's going on with this article is that I think Ian likes Animal Crossing.
Yeah,
he's playing it with his family. I think he's enjoying it, and I think that maybe makes it a little harder to kind of shoehorn this into one of those articles that has a big, bold, brash take. And instead, it's this more nuanced thing. And then he's offloaded that onto us, like your historical reading and my just bouncing off of it and being a kind of curmudgeonly negative voice, saying that I'm not enjoying it. that's our role.
Right. So what's your role in this is to just be the naysayer, and this is exactly what you were saying last week here on the discourse, but in a series of texts. I guess did you rehearse last week's discourse by texting Ian? Is that what happened there?
Yeah. Well, he says text, but it wasn't really a text. It was Skype, and that's
okay.
the embarrassing and boomer reality is that.
Wow, Microsoft product.
Skype to communicate with each other occasionally. So it wasn't a drunk text; it was a drunk Skype.
Wow, and, true confessions.
Yeah, and it's just like the weird thing is, okay, so everyone knows that I hate the new Animal Crossing. It's fine, and everyone knows my caveat, which is I don't want to harsh anyone's mellow. If you're enjoying Animal Crossing, far be it from me to say that that's that you shouldn't be doing that. I wanted to enjoy it and I bounced off of it, but it also, you have to understand, this is my way of enjoying it. Like reaching out to someone and being like, what is going on with Animal Crossing? Why is it like, it's so bad? Like, I hate it so much. And all these other people, that is a way of participating in a social moment. Like that's a perfectly legitimate and valid way to like enjoy a thing that's happening as a shared public kind of engagement with art. So I will just if I can frame it like that, then this is just my way of playing Animal Crossing and
right. That makes sense. But your objection to the new Animal Crossing is really more about the texture and the design details of this particular version, or do you think it's now extended to like the feeling of Animal Crossing in general? It just no longer works on you?
Well, I mean, as you know, I'm not a huge Nintendo fan. I'm not a huge, fan of that. And I find that the worst parts of the Nintendo aesthetic are the parts that are, I feel, very kind of paternalistic. This sense of like video games as a carefully crafted hedonic experience where you're going to be led through this little thing and shown the parts that are fun. And Animal Crossing does definitely express the worst aspects of that kind of saccharine, over-designed quality. But I will say, I'm really enjoying Ring Fit Adventure, right? I'm a big fan of Mario Kart. And so it's not that I hate that aesthetic over, or Animal Crossing in general. Like, I'm perfectly capable of enjoying this kind of game. So there's nothing about it intrinsically that doesn't work for me. I just literally bounced off the actual words and this pacing back and forth on that little island. Maybe if I'd stuck with it, and every night Hillary and I are like, should we go back to Animal Crossing, give it one more try? Because we want it to work. And we just look at each other and our hearts sink. We just hate Tom Nook. We hate being lectured at constantly. They've been talking to us. We hate and it's also just, it feels like a weird, maybe we just haven't gotten deep enough, but it feels like a kind of empty space, and we wander back and forth. I feel like it's like a day in the life of Ivan Denisovich, this pacing back and forth on this little prison island, picking up berries and sticks and trying to make the time pass.
It is a little bit claustrophobic after a while, oddly enough.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out whether it's this iteration of Animal Crossing or Animal Crossing in general. I can no longer remember clearly what it was like to play the GameCube Animal Crossing. I remember I felt differently, but it's also probably because I was in college or something at that point, right? No.
Should we talk about other people? Is there other Animal Crossing news?
Let's keep going to the next article. What's in there? Okay. Oh, Turnip Bouncer. So this is the kind of multiplayer thing that you tend to like in online games.
I love this, and I love reading about it. This is like EVE Online. It's like I don't have to play EVE Online to enjoy you reading about the Mittani, and I don't have to play Animal Crossing to enjoy observing the stock market from a distance.
Right. And so I guess what's going on here is people randomly have high stock prices for the turnips, right? They sometimes you can sell 100 turnips for like 600, 700 bells. So then they announce, okay, I've got a bull market, and then a whole bunch of people rush over to that island to sell their turnips, but you have to pay a fee. You have to basically pay a brokerage fee in order to use somebody's island for this. And So they've set up these elaborate entryways with bouncers and stuff for one person to come in at a time to the store, go from the harbor to the store. And and then go in, sell your turnips, give a tip, maybe give a tip first to the person who's running the operation. And all these operations run a little bit differently. I've visited some of them. But yeah, to keep people from going into other parts of the island where they maybe are not wanted, right? So this is no longer the fantasy of like, oh, hey, it's nice. We go and visit each other's islands whenever we want to. Now it's like very serious business. I think I'm sort of into that mutation.
Yeah, it's cool. This is the kind of weird, unexpected evolution of game systems that it's always fun to see when it happens. And it's kind of a great reminder of how difficult it is to predict how complex systems will evolve, right, and what will be the outcome of your plans for structuring an experience, even at this tiny level, right? Even when what you're designing is a toy experience, right? You're not trying to design an institution or a set of laws or a set of customs for the real world. You're like, for example, a world in which we have thermometers on buses, and you belong to your status, your infected status is encrypted and is a form of knowledge that you share as a security protocol with people. Like, what is that world going to be like, and what are the kind of unexpected corner cases and unpredictable evolutions that world is going to take? Well, it's really hard to predict. It's really hard to know, because even when we just try to design a tiny little toy version of a society, it tends to erupt into these crazy, interesting, complicated, unexpected directions.
Right, absolutely. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that I don't know. I think of it as game designer porn in some ways. But Robert has an interesting question.
Modesty is the lesson we should draw from this as designers, as system designers. Yeah, modesty. We should have a deep understanding of the limitations of our ability to correctly predict how things are going to unfold.
Yeah, exactly. And like as people were saying in chat, that there are scams being run now. It is very EVE Online-esque. Wait, but Robert asked, why is this capitalism cool? I don't think Animal Crossing is about capitalism per se, right? It's about weird accommodations at the edge of capitalism. Like that's what the original Village Debt thing was about. It was about a collective society trying to figure out how to interface with capitalism. And Animal Crossing is like the other weird end of that, right? Where it's like, well, we all are programmed to constantly try to hoard things and collect things and pay debts. But like, what happens if we are suddenly like thrown into a weird situation that's just slightly beyond that? And that's where you get the stock market bouncer. That's where that occurs, I think.
Also, the answer is because it's an artwork, right? Yeah. This is because like war is not cool, but a movie about war can be cool, right? Capitalism isn't cool, but a game about capitalism could be cool because it's a way of framing that thing and giving us a perspective on that.
Right, and we shouldn't really need to say that not all simulations of capitalism are simply training and promoting capitalism, but it seems that we do need to say that. And I don't know, I actually think it's good to point out, just as it's good for Ian to point out, hey, games have procedural rhetoric in them. I like to try and point out, actually, there are different ways that games are struggling with things like monetary earning systems and resource scarcity that we think of as terrible things in the real world. They're not just all placed into a game for funsies or for an abstract artistic statement. It's there's actually something often a little bit more convoluted going on, and that's what I think.
I should point out, as always, the opinions that Naomi and I express on the discourse are the official stance.
They are
of the NYU Game Center.
Yeah, and so games, I think we officially believe, are closest to both drugs and pornography.
Yeah.
Of all forms of human expression.
Yes, and this is something that not only we believe, but all of the faculty here at the Game Center and all of the students also believe.
Yes, because everyone's been indoctrinated. All right, let's speaking of faculty, let's go to one of our adjunct faculty's opinions about Animal Crossing. It's the next link. So I thought I would put into the spotlight here Alexander King, who wrote a long thread. This is in the wake of the Ian Bogost article and to some of the reactions against it. He was actually a little bit irked that that there are too many smart game formalists who don't get Animal Crossing. I don't know who he's talking about here. I don't think it's you, Frank.
Yeah, exactly. Like what? I'm so baffled by this. First of all, we have to point out the joke. So first of all, you have to explain that Alexander is making a joke here, but he's combining two memes. The difficulty argument, which we're not going to talk about today, actually. The little difficult shit, Rami Ismail's thing about should games be made more accessible by having difficulty controls, right? So that's what this opening salvo is. And then he takes a real hard whack at what appears to be just a full straw man of like, these formalists critiquing Animal Crossing for being boring don't understand that it's so much more than that. It's like, who is he talking about? He's certainly not Ian. And I haven't come across any arguments to this effect, but maybe I'm just not paying attention. So I don't know.
I was trying to figure that out. So there were, for instance, some responses to Ian's article. And Ian's article is very much kind of along these lines, right? Oh, there's so much more to Animal Crossing. You don't have to just sit and make money all day. Right. But there were responses to it, and there have been other takes recently that are like, look, don't praise Animal Crossing. It's just another shitty capitalism simulator.
Okay, so
that was what I thought was like. Oh,
the people that I've seen making that argument are definitely not formalists or whatever. Who is a formalist? What a dumb term. I apologize for.
I believe Robert Yang identifies as a formalist. Excuse me.
In making that term, comment, because I am now embarrassed that it has this weird kind of legacy of just like a confusing. It's like it's not clarifying things in most cases. But the people I've seen making that argument are interesting, nuanced takes that are saying, look, I'm bouncing off this thing and I'm glad that you guys are enjoying it. But for me, it just feels like a weird, oppressive, kind of loop that I don't like. And,
right.
And so I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's
Alexander,
funny.
If that's directed at me, I feel like, it's not accurate.
Well, so his follow-up tweets are basically saying, why are people just complaining about loans and making money and gathering resources? So like, I don't think that that's exactly what you or Ian or anybody has been saying, right? It's a little bit, but that is an error. I think he's trying to point out, look, all of the economic grind of Animal Crossing is just there as a structure to help support the beauty of Animal Crossing. And so I got into a conversation with him later on in this thread on Twitter where I was like, yeah, I mean, that I don't disagree with you, but surely we should be aiming for like a holistic view where we understand like, oh, the skeleton is kind of an important part of an organism's body. It holds up all of this other nice looking stuff. Mm-hmm. But, and if you talk to somebody who's like, I don't know, an osteologist, or a bone doctor of some kind, then they're going to be like, oh, I think about the skeleton all the time. That's all I think about. Oh yeah, there's Blake. Blake talking about.
I love Alexander King. One of the smartest people I know. So I'm just willing to say that this is a great thread and an interesting, fun take. But I will say that there's a strange dance that happens when you like a thing and you encounter someone talking shit about it.
Yeah.
And Alexander is making a move in this dance, right?
Yeah,
and
no, it's true. He
saying,
got punchy.
Your dislike of this thing is rooted in a misunderstanding, right? So that's one step you can make in that dance. You can say you have a deficient view. Cognitively, you are missing part of the picture, and therefore your take is based on this deficit, right? You're misunderstanding. So that's a move you can make. It's not the move I like to make. I think, but it's certainly a legitimate move. Maybe he's right. Maybe there are people out there who are like missing this piece, and if they saw it, they would agree.
They'd be like, "Aha!"
Alexander King. Yeah. But I think it's useful to consider that dance and to understand, like, first of all, before you engage in that dance, what are you hoping to get out of it? Are you just want to move and enjoy the feeling of moving with other people, or are you trying to like push the whole party in a certain direction? Or, are you selling tickets to your dance? And this is like something that you want to make that people can observe it. So it's like, there's lots of reasons to do that dance. But we should all of us be aware that it is a well understood back and forth, and that you should have a conscious, purpose before you step into that mosh pit and do your thing.
Agreed. Yeah, no, just know what you're doing, or be aware of what people's positions are and like why these things are happening the way they do at the times they do. I'm sorry, I'm changing my background too frequently now. It's just chaotic, too many different moods. Let's continue to the next, whatever the next link is. I don't even remember anymore.
Alexander's there. Shout out to Alexander in the chat. I did say I love you, so that should excuse everything, right? Is that how it works? If you love someone, you can just say whatever you want about them.
I think maybe it works that way in the context of some talk shows. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So now here we are. How are new releases on Steam performing? This was a bunch of data that Valve released a couple weeks ago to try and, I don't know, buoy the spirits of developers everywhere and say, hey, this is a better time than ever on Steam. Over time, there's been a continuous increase in the number of games achieving success, right? That isn't this like just a tide that's lifting all boats?
Yeah.
Right. So is this true though? So actually, if we scroll down in this article, you can see they have a bunch of graphs that look very attractive, right? You see like the number of games that are earning at least $10,000 in their first 2 weeks. And it's just climbing and climbing, and the trends are getting better. It's getting steeper, right? Now, not everybody bought this story. If you go to the next link, Ars Technica took a hatchet to these numbers. They looked at the data and they said, you know what? You could slice it that way, or you can slice it this way. And so look at this. This is Ars Technica's graph on the screen now, and they're saying, well, if you really look at the entire big picture of the number of, and you're not just looking at the games that are doing really well, there's this massive category of games that are making almost nothing, right? And that.
Right, but so the weird thing about this Ars Technica article is it's not really clear what their critique of the numbers is. They're not saying that what Steam is presenting is incorrect.
They're saying they locked off the bottom.
Yeah, but they're not saying that the trend is that there's more games making less money. They're just saying, look at all these games that don't make a lot of money.
Right. I think they're saying
this is a good example of how difficult data journalism is.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And so it's like we have these numbers and these are probably accurate, but it's really hard to turn them into a story. So this is a case where actually Alexander King, who's in the chat, and we know, I would love to hear Alexander's take on this, because I don't feel confident that I myself am numerically literate enough to really look at these numbers and understand how to extrapolate like a good picture or a good lesson. Like, what is the story that we should be learning? When I've talked to some people, I've talked to some people who are a little bit smarter about this stuff, like Bennett, and he's trying to tell me stories about like, oh, well, the top 20th percentile is doing better, and the bottom 20th percentile is doing better, and then the vast middle is basically doing worse.
Right. So you can actually see that here on this graph.
I literally had to get him to explain to me what a percent. I didn't understand what that meant. So I'm just not capable of really understanding this stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what Bennett is saying is roughly correct, and you can kind of see it in these numbers. But what Ars Technica's gotcha is, they're saying, yeah, look, Steam is telling you the story, Valve is telling the story. There are more successful games than ever, right? But what they're not telling you is the number of successful games and the growth in that area is dwarfed by the growth in the number of unsuccessful games, right?
But if you scroll down to the bottom of the Ars Technica article, how they leave this is, so it does look like, fair enough, things are getting better over time. However, things are complicated. So
right, it's complicated because there are more games selling, and the people who are doing well are selling more games, and there are more people who are selling well. But the flip side of that story is, if you take a random person selling games on Steam, then they're much more likely than they used to be to have just a failure game, right?
Yeah, so this is what we want to understand as game designers and people who are going to release things on Steam. We want to know, how much money am I likely to make?
Right.
And it doesn't actually help to just look at these raw numbers, because you can say, well, most games released on Steam don't make any money. And then you look at what that category includes, and it's just like tons and tons of things that aren't trying to make money, right? Little weird one-offs, art projects, trolls and pranks and underground things that are not really trying to make money. And so really what we want to know is, if I release something of this that fits into this category, how likely am I to make money, and how much money am I likely to make? And I think in that the answer to that question is probably pretty close to the picture Valve wants to paint. I think it actually is a reasonably good time to like be releasing, medium-sized games of a certain quality on Steam, and you can have reasonable confidence that that's a practical thing to do.
The thing is, there's a bar, right? If you exceed that bar, then your chances are probably better. If you're below that bar, your chances are probably worse. I would say that's the rough way to look at it. But the problem is, it's hard to know exactly where that bar is or what controls it. And people argue about that all the time, right?
Yep.
And how to frame that. And they say, well, below the bar, that's all shovelware and low effort stuff, which is, of course, deeply disrespectful to the people who happen to have low sales who were trying really hard, right?
Yeah.
That I think is what makes it difficult.
Yeah, and so Alexander is making a point in the chat.
Yeah.
The other thing to keep in mind is how Steam Spy data are a single radar ping in a vast ocean. So it's hard to make good inferences without good data, and Valve is in the best position to tell the story they want since they have the full picture.
Right.
This
so
is a classic. This is the thing about, like, if you're able to run experiments as much as you want, and then you're getting a range of outputs, and then you can take one of those and say, look, I ran this experiment and here was the data I got. It's like, you really do. This is why we're in the middle of a revolution in rethinking social science and how that's done and how data works as evidence. And really, you need to sort of pre-publish your experiment to commit to a methodology and then show data. You can't start with a bunch of data and say, oh, look, I have this data and I can extrapolate from it, because we don't know where that data came from. And welcome to the post-rationalist minute of the discourse, right? This is the state of reality. It's not just games journalism or data journalism or social science that has this problem. It's making sense of the world that has this problem. You kind of have to, like, if you want to be a Bayesian and be a rationalist and be like, I'm a logical person that uses reason to understand the world, you have to, in a way, pre-publish your own experiments. You have to commit to a certain methodology and explain where your priors come from, right? And so this is a dilemma that goes very deeply. And thank you for attending my TED Talk.
Yeah, of course. I mean,
how's that sewage water taste?
You're right on about all of that stuff. I think one of the things about this Ars Technica backlash, which was picked up by a bunch of other gaming journalism outlets, is that Valve could just say, look, let's be more transparent. Let's show you guys what's going on. Let's let you draw your own conclusions, right? What they goofed up on here was to try and be like, hey, let's put out a glowing press release based on our data, and not realizing that there's enough smart people who are like obsessed with Steam Spy, which is very incomplete, that they're going to be like, hold on, this is fishy, right? So why not actually let more people crunch these numbers, look at this data? I don't know. Of course, there are probably proprietary business reasons, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but you know what? You're 100% right. I think that was a mistake of Valve not to recognize that would have been a better thing and a bigger win just for them to be transparent and give people access to this. It's also closer to the spirit of American PC game development that Valve should be using as a legacy, drawing from as a legacy. Right? This is part of our culture as game developers, and as American PC game developers especially, which Valve, has their roots in. And it is the spirit of radical openness, of shipping the tools with the game, of allowing people to mod your games and turn them into new things. Valve should be doing that with its data. And shame on Valve for not recognizing that.
Yeah, some of the greatest, I think, advances overall in people understanding how to make online games and online services have been when people just are sharing huge amounts of data. And it becomes part of the common discourse. Yep. I remember when Daniel James did that with 3 Rings before 3 Rings was absorbed by Sega. Not very many people remember that now, but it was revolutionary in actually bringing about a shift to a lot of free-to-play economies. Not necessarily a great thing in the long run, but the way that he was doing it back then was much more interesting. But yeah, I don't know. When people share data, things move forward in a different way. That's my take.
Yep, great take.
But let's talk about growth in general. This next link is also about growth, especially in games lately. It's been a huge news story, right? That's come up in recent weeks here on the discourse, that the games are booming. More people are playing games online. There's more mobile downloads. But now Bloomberg has noticed that actually revenues are not up. And this should not be surprising to us either, that people are not spending a ton of money. Now, they're not talking about people buying copies of Ring Fit off of eBay or something like that. They're saying a ton of people are downloading games to play online and in mobile, but they're not making in-app purchases. They're not doing microtransactions. They're not clicking on ads. This shouldn't be surprising to us at all, I don't think, because increased volume, huge numbers of people coming in the front door doesn't mean that you're suddenly selling a whole lot more.
Right, and it's not that they're not generating more money. They're just not generating as much more money as you might think.
That's right.
So it has not been a one-to-one increase. But that, again, yeah, what you're saying makes sense. And the increase in players is enormous. So we look at some of these numbers are like 60% increase in China of people playing games and playing mobile games and which is huge. And so, but only maybe a 15 or 20%. Yeah, there we go. A 15% increase in revenue. Yeah,
this is from Superdata and Nielsen, so it's not, I think, not exactly about mobile games. It's some of it is actually surveys and so on and so forth, right?
This is another example of like, what are you going to do with this data journalism? It's like the worst of both worlds. It's the worst of data and the worst of journalism. Right? Taking these janky numbers and trying to, carve them and shape them and put them into a story. I just think it's too early to tell what's going on. The one thing we know is that tons of people are playing these games, and the people will figure out how to make money.
But I do have a hot take. I think that there is something that's going to have to change. Like, people should be thinking differently about how to make money if we are really in a new environment where more people are playing games. Part of what this article says is, well, maybe this is just temporary. Maybe people are going to stop playing games after this pandemic is over. I think probably the truth is somewhere in between. But look, if you are optimized to sell goods in a little specialist market, right? Let's say you're like a weird electronic salesperson and you sell to hobbyists and you're in like the back of a crowded like warehouse, and people come up to you and buy things from you, and you bank on like making this one really big order from the guy who like has an enormous model train kit in his garage, and that pays your rent for a couple months. Then you would get really excited if suddenly it's like, wow, there's been a boom in people who wanting to buy this stuff. Like suddenly I have thousands of people coming by my stall. But if you don't change the way that you're doing business, that you're not actually going to get hundreds of times as many of like that one hobbyist guy who has the train set in his garage. And this is my metaphor for how mobile games in particular, but actually more and more like any kind of free online game, Riot Games, so who knows, like whoever is doing free to play, right? They're relying on whale players, right? The people who spend a huge amount of money, and there are very few of them, but they're extremely dedicated. And everything revolves around those players, trying to make sure they don't burn out or lose their jobs, or that you don't like over abuse them. They're trying to abuse those people just enough. And so that actually leaves you in a bad position to deal with like a huge influx of tourists. Honestly, it's not a tourist business. It's it's a hardcore market. And I think that, if there are people who are like not making as much money as they could be because their businesses are optimized that way, they deserve to be missing out on this, right?
And the clever people who are looking at this as an opportunity will figure out new things that aren't ads and that aren't milking whales, and figure out how to provide things that people want, that they're willing to pay for. And so it's a good thing that the standard methods of monetizing these games aren't working.
Right. Well, hopefully it'll shake things up. The people are asking, like, aren't there games that have made a lot of money off of small dollar payers? I mean, I think, there are some that are a little bit more towards that side. Like, what are the examples that chat's pointing out? Temple Run and Candy Crush? I don't know, Franco, you have a little bit more background in this stuff from back in the Facebook days.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there are people whose business model is sort of less whale dependent?
No. I just gave up on that whole world. And I'm actually I don't have any insight into that.
Right.
I mean, I like to sell games for money. And
directly for money?
I sell t-shirts. I sell t-shirts for money. I make most of my money from mugs and t-shirts.
That makes sense. Universal paper clips.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's keep going to the next link. What do we have now? I forget.
Merchandise. Okay.
I think the next one is this Call of Duty? Yeah, Call of Duty is officially a work of art now, according to a district judge in New York State. I know you cover your eyes, but this actually has ramifications. This means that games now have legal standing to include trademarked items within them without licensing those items.
The reason I'm covering my hands, covering my face with my hands, risking myself with bad face hygiene, is not because of Call of Duty, but is because of the word art, right? This is the thing that is so confusing. It's like a stupidity grenade that you can throw into the middle of any conversation, right? The word art is so overloaded and ineffective in helping people understand what's going on. You have to think of this. I mean, I think this is a perfectly good result and a perfectly common sense, reasonable result. And I'm happy that the court made this ruling. But you have to even in the article, they then go from this ruling to talking about museums and stuff like, oh, well, if a game's a work of art, well, the Museum of Modern Art collects games. It's like, no, it's not art in that sense, you idiots. It's art like Justin Bieber is art. They're just saying it's like a Justin Bieber album. Like, you know how we call musical performers artists? Like, and now the musical artist, Justin Bieber. It's like, so if we could just get into that habit of thinking of that, they're really just saying that it is it's an expressive form of culture, that is an aesthetic experience or whatever. But of course, as soon as the word art shows up, we're all of a sudden we're talking about Picasso and look at the museum. It's like, oh, what a waste of time.
And so just as Justin Bieber can talk about a Humvee in the lyrics of his song, now Call of Duty can put a Hummer into the game, yes, and it's fine.
If Justin Bieber can do Hummers, then so can Call of Duty.
Right. So there we go. There you have it. I don't know. I think practically speaking, probably you could still get sued by somebody if they want to sue you for putting their trademark in your game. So be careful out there, kids. But you do have some legal standing to do so.
This is like such a this is not a minefield. You can put whatever you want in your game. You're probably never going to get in trouble.
Kind of, yeah. Well, if you're Activision, there are all of these weird deals between arms manufacturers and first-person shooter.
Yeah, if you're Activision, you should worry.
Yeah,
like, this is an important thing to worry about if you're Activision Blizzard. But
right. But I find like students do worry about this, right? They're like, wait, can I put this in my game, or am I going to get in trouble, right? And I think our answer is just do whatever you want to.
Yes. If you get in trouble, it's the best possible outcome is that someone's paying attention to your game and
and they're upset about it and it's a controversy. Do it. I can just tell you, like, the next game that I'm working on right now is a complete theft of intellectual property from multiple people. So,
good.
Yeah. So if I'm doing it, why not everybody?
Yeah. I mean, you gotta have a little bit of the attitude of like YouTube. When YouTube started, like, there was nothing about YouTube that wasn't illegal. It's just pure, like, just take video and just say you got from it wherever,
right? Yeah, exactly.
Put it on our website, and then we'll figure it out later. And the YouTube changed the laws to fit what people wanted.
Right.
And so
and now it's really janky, right?
Don't rip people off. Don't defame people. But other than that, if you are making work that is creative and original, then don't worry about the other. You're not going to get in trouble, right? If you're not a con artist or running a grift, then you really, most of the time, you don't have anything to worry about. And then occasionally disaster strikes and you're like that person that did the 8-bit version of Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. Remember that famous article? That people can look up this, there's an album of like bit music versions of Miles Davis songs. Right. And he just wanted to use the cover from this famous photo of Miles Davis on the cover of Kind of Blue, and then ended up getting dragged into like a years-long lawsuit, and it was a terrible thing. But that's right. Really the exception that proves the rule. And even that is something I wouldn't know about if it hadn't happened. So
and let's be real though, like if one of us were to start singing a song and we were fairly accurate, like right now, then we couldn't put the video onto YouTube. It would get a DMCA strike.
Yeah.
Due to the automated song scraping systems, right? So
sometimes
they're in a weird place.
There are actual, you need to be aware of the practical issues of what's going to get taken down off of YouTube.
Right.
But in terms of like worrying about this in a principled way, there's just make good original things and then just steal and be inspired by and copy the things around you in a way that is honest
and figure out how to dodge the robot drones that are constantly hovering overhead, monitoring intellectual property usage, right?
And taking your temperature.
And what?
And taking your temperature.
And taking your temperature, exactly, to make sure that you're not violating quarantine laws. Okay, let's go to the next, our next story. All right, yeah, speaking of pandemics, we're back to coronavirus news. This is a piece in the New York Times. Stephen Totillo, editor-in-chief of Kotaku, writing for the New York Times, talking to James Vaughn, creator of Plague Inc. Plague Inc., I didn't realize this. We had talked about them on previous discourses.
Yep.
But they have been like at the top of the charts for paid games for quite some time. Like a ton of people are playing this. And I didn't know this until recently. I interviewed James at Games for Change last summer, and I was researching his game. And Plague Inc. has just made just ridiculous amounts of money for years, and they just continue to update this game. I don't even think they have to update it, but they do. And now they're giving huge amounts of their current profits to pandemic relief and research which as they should, right? Because they're kind of making money off of this idea. But I think it's interesting because they're sort of doing everything right in some ways. You know, they're not sensationalizing this. They have a very serious simulation under the hood of this game, and it's banned in China, which is interesting too, right? And there's almost no content related to China in this game. That's the interesting thing.
I like everything about this article. I think everybody here looks good. I think New York Times this is a smart, interesting article about video games. I think they brought Stephen Totilo in to write it. I think that was a good call. I'm glad to see him getting a byline in the Times. I think James Vaughn looks really smart and thoughtful as a designer, and the way he's thinking about this game in the context of what's happening right now, I think is really smart and thoughtful and interesting. And this is just thumbs up all the way around.
Here's I'm going to go out on a limb and say, like, here's my theory of why I think China is banning this game. So the popular speculation has been that it was downloaded just a huge number of times on the Chinese iOS App Store, and that people were playing it, and there had to be some warnings added, like don't try to take this too literally in terms of advice or how pandemics operate. But the other thing, and that I know from researching this last year, is that most strategy guides for this game, the number one, like, easy mode tip is, oh, well, if you're going to start a new plague, you should start in China. Like, that's considered to be like the easy starting area. It's like Australia was for Risk, right? It's like, oh, well, if you start in Australia, you can just, that's the easy place to start trying to take over the world from because of the layout of the Risk board. Yep. Well, something about the simulation in Plague Inc. makes it relatively easy to start in China. There are just a bunch of starting conditions there, including, you know, how large the country is, and, you know, the borders are somewhat artificial in Plague Inc., but a lot of it is very carefully simulated. But the, you know, levels of rurality versus urbanity, and the and various things about sanitation and poverty levels in China, and then how much travel is happening between China and other locations, make it this all sort of like a perfect place to start off your new disease. And so that I can see the party in China would be really mad about if that was kind of baked into the simulation. Yeah, like, not really on purpose, but through research.
This is procedural rhetoric. So this is Ian Bogost's, you know, point about how games mean and how games can generate meaning as little systems. Really, this is an example of it. And it's fascinating and cool. I think someone in the chat mentioned how often the issue of virality becomes a kind of story coming out of games. So remember the blood plague in WoW?
Yep.
And how that spread. And I think that is really an example of emergent properties of dynamic systems. Games are the one and only place where in popular culture we can see that play out and experience it firsthand, right? You don't see that in the movie Contagion, right? You see the results of it, right? You see a story about it, but you don't engage directly with the system. You don't see how the system responds to decisions that affect the underlying parameters. But in a game, you do. You get to have your, you know, access to the knobs about things like borders and laws and temperatures and drones, and you can adjust them and see how the system responds. And that's really powerful.
Yeah, and if you're interested in this type of simulation, I encourage you to check out the expansion packs for Plague Inc., because then if you're a systems designer, economy designer, you'll get to see into the inside of James Vaughn's brain and be like, whoa, they tweaked some stuff about this, and then they have a completely different game that results from it in all the expansions. So check that out. Speaking of emergence in games, let's go to the next story, because this is very closely, hotly related. Another game that's been banned in China, Hong Kong, due to Hong Kong messages, Animal Crossing has been removed from sale, right? And for a completely different reason, kind of. I guess this is because, wait, scroll down. I wonder if this is in the article, but there are some pictures. Yeah. In this tweet halfway down in the article from Joshua Wong, of course, they've got signs inside of Animal Crossing that say "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Times." So there you go. That's all it takes to get your product removed from sale. And this is like it's the equivalent of that ESRB rating that we have here, which is like ESRB online games could have people, other human beings in it doing things and sending you messages. So like, yeah, like people can actually make shit in a game, and therefore it's a little bit too dangerous. But I don't know. The old school take on this is, well, you can why are you banning games? You're not banning paper. You're not banning like people's ability to like write and draw and anything other medium of expression. But is it more dangerous because it's a game? I don't know. What do you think?
No, I guess the old take is the one I like, right? You can't you can't outlaw pencils, and you can use a pencil to run the full gamut of political expression, and I think games are closer to pencils in many cases than people realize. So there's this constant vacillation between, are games a drawing or are games a pencil, right? Are they an expression themselves, or are they a tool for expression? And the reality is that they are a strange and complicated hybrid of both of those things.
I think that's why they seem dangerous, right? They appear to be a little bit new and captivating, and like they could spread like wildfire in a way that somebody's drawing on a piece of paper won't, unless you're a brilliant artist. But in a game, it's somehow like, oh, wow, if people are making these things in a game and it's getting passed around, then so this could just take off and we wouldn't know what to do about it because it's this new thing, this game, right? So that I think is a little bit terrifying to authority in some way. I don't know.
What's next?
All right, yeah, let's keep going. Oh yeah, making games free. So I think this maybe is where we'll wind up today, but there's this phenomenon now that people are that companies are making various things free as part of their response to the pandemic. And a lot of times it does feel kind of nice, like, oh, here, we'll do this free giveaway, we'll do this and that. It's usually not something that's going to really impact their bottom line hugely. And I guess my thought on this is that it's maybe generally well-meaning, like companies trying to figure out, like, well, what can we do? We're PlayStation. We're not all of Sony. We're just this one wing of Sony that does video games. Well, I guess we can give people some free video games. So I think for the most part, it seems to be nice. But also we're in a weird age where more and more stuff is being given away for free, right? Like people have a glut of free stuff. If you are subscribed to Apple Arcade free for a month, you got like more games than you could ever play. Epic is giving away free games every week. Like we're drowning in free things.
Yeah, it is. It's great. I think mostly this is just great. It's nice people wanting to do something nice during a terrible time. And so I think mostly it's just people being nice and it's fine. Right. But I do think you're putting your finger on a deeper issue, which Jaron Lanier talks about a lot. I don't know if you know the VR pioneer, Jaron Lanier, sure, who recently become more of a kind of a cultural critic of technology with I think a very insightful take on why the internet is the way it is. And one of Lanier's main points is the internet, a lot of the problems with internet culture are rooted in the overlap of these two ideologies. On the one hand, you have capitalism, the idea that we can use the internet to make money, make things, have an open market and generate revenue. And on the other hand, this idea that information wants to be free, that because digital stuff is not limited by the material constraints of the real world, that things that are digital should be free and we should all have access to them. And because the pioneers, this is Jaron's story, right? But his story is that because the pioneers of the internet wanted to hang on to both of these at the same time. That's why we have advertising as the primary way of thinking about being compensated for work that we do that is generating digital content. And it sucks. It's bad. Advertising is not the optimal way of doing this. Advertising is not a great way of doing it. And instead, we should be experimenting with new ways of compensating people for their labor in the context of creating digital content. You know, that these people who that is just this weird janky system with this third-party advertising, generation that leads to a kind of strange, messy perversity in a lot of internet culture, and so this kind of plays into that a little bit. This idea that things should be free, that people expect things to be free, and that we don't mind that they ultimately get paid for with this strange set of incentives and rent-seeking and weird, institutional ways of generating revenue that aren't directly related to creating things of value that people want and sharing them. So
I know you're a fan. You were just saying, 15 minutes ago that you're a fan of the I sell games to people and they give me money for the thing, kind of old school model. But it seems like we're just moving further away from that with subscription services and all sorts of other ways of arbitrage between the people making the thing in the first place, and then somebody eventually getting it for a deal down the road, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be a wild ride. Okay, let's wrap up with the very next link, which is related to this last one.
By the way, I should mention that we made a free version of our game, which you can play on the internet at playheyrobot.com.
Playheyrobot.com, So if you want to play another game for free,
make sure to mention that. Playheyrobot.com. Make that a headline, Robert.
And I have a much worse offer, which is that I'm going to make my game, which is a non-digital game, available for $1, but you have to print it out yourself.
There you go.
All right. So our last story is that Stadia is also free. Oh my gosh, we can get Stadia for free now?
Wait a minute.
What? Wow, this is so nice. I can't believe Google was nice enough to make Stadia free. Wow. Now, keep in mind, you still have to buy the games to play on Stadia.
Of course.
Now you can play them on Stadia for free.
Yeah, they're not going to give you the service for free and then also the games for free.
Yeah, but it used to cost $130 to gain entry to Stadia, where you could then buy some additional games or buy a pro subscription to play your games over Stadia. And in theory, what you were getting for this was the Stadia controller.
Yeah.
But now they're like, oh, you know what? You don't need the controller. Just have it.
Yeah, it turns out that the controller was just like a security protocol or something.
Yeah, it's like a fancy dongle.
The dongle. Ugh.
So I don't know. I think this is just sort of hilarious. They did also make the pro version free for 2 months, so you could actually play a bunch of games for free, and then you'll not be able to play them after 2 months. So there you go.
So
it's much worse than all these other free giveaways.
We're dunking on Stadia right now.
Yeah.
But next week we're gonna lead with the pro Stadia take, which is about the people doing AI research, which is
there's some interesting stuff going on inside the Stadia labs. The people who are
Aaron Hoffman-John and Anna Kipnis are doing cool stuff with machine learning in Stadia labs, and we're going to talk.
For sure. I think that's where there's interesting stuff going on. This whole idea of that they're going to sell hardcore gamers on playing cloud gaming via Google was always kind of a strange smokescreen for like an R&D project that's happening inside of Google. It's like that show Devs.
Oh, is that good? Should I watch that?
Is
it Alex Garland?
It is Alex Garland. Yeah, I think if you'll find its take on free will facile.
Oh,
but you might that might be intriguing to you.
I might check it out.
Devs is okay, and let's. What is it on Hulu? Something like that.
Oh God, if it's on Hulu, I guess is Hulu free now? I don't.
Yeah, maybe everything is free somehow. Yeah, it's on my personal Plex server, which you can have access to if you want.
Just post the link in the chat, will you?
Yeah, for sure. All right, we should wrap it up there and let Mirabai rest. Thank you once again for all the excellent captioning.
To Naomi for putting this whole thing together. You do the heavy lifting, and it's always a pleasure. Robert, Mirabai, thank you so much.